That's right. If you want to be more persuasive, you just gotta treat your audience like a grilled cheese. One of the things that I really like about rhetoric is that it forces us to account for human nature. When you're trying to persuade your audience, you need to recognize that your audience is made up of human beings, and as a result, you have to set up your argument so that it actually persuades real people. And one important thing to know about people is that while they can change, they often struggle to make huge changes all at once. And you know that. People make jokes about failing at their New Year's resolutions all the time. And you may even know somebody who makes big plans to change their whole lifestyle so that it only includes brisk walks and tossed salads. They may stick to those goals for a few days and then wonder how they ended up binge watching YouTube and eating frozen pizza for the second day in a row. Even well-intentioned people struggle to stick with their goals because changing for the better is difficult. So to get a better idea of how to avoid undermining our own persuasive efforts by overwhelming our audience's capacity to act, I like to think about persuasion in the same way that I think about making a grilled cheese sandwich. And you heard me right. If you treat your audience like a grilled cheese, you are more likely to persuade them to make real, lasting changes. And today, I'm going to show you how it all works. The first time I ever made a grilled cheese, the only thing I really knew was that I was hungry and that I wanted to eat soon. So I did a perfectly reasonable thing and put the pan on the highest heat possible. And it made sense. A hotter pan would make for a faster sandwich, right? Now you might already see where this is going. In fact, you can see right now exactly where it went. Not only did I not get the sandwich as fast as I'd hoped, I ended up with a sandwich that was charred on the outside and cold in the middle, and that was the opposite of what I wanted. And you know, I think we tend to adopt a pretty similar strategy when we start writing arguments. We see something that's wrong in the world, we get excited about fixing it, and then we turn the heat up to high and write an impassioned argument telling our audience everything they need to do to make the world a better place. When we do that, though, we might actually end up with something worse than what we started out with, or at the very least, we'll probably fail to cause lasting, sustainable change. You see, a grilled cheese can only take so much heat at once. When you try to put more heat into the sandwich than it can handle at a time, all that heat piles up on the outside, and with nowhere else to go, it just ends up burning the sandwich. So if people are like grilled cheese sandwiches, then we have to acknowledge that there's a real risk of overwhelming our audiences when we push too hard for an overly elaborate plan all at once. If you were ever a kid, you might know that adults are always telling kids to pick things up. Well, when I was a kid, I noticed that there were two main strategies that adults tended to use when they were telling me to pick things up. One type of adult rattled off a whole list of things that they wanted me to pick up or clean all at once. And I got really frustrated with those adults because I had barely started to do one thing before they were asking me to do another. I couldn't do both at the same time, and it didn't take long for me to feel overwhelmed and like I just wanted to give up. The second type of adult, however, took a more effective approach. They'd give me one job and then let me finish it before giving me another. In essence, they treated me like a grilled cheese. After my first disastrous attempt at making a grilled cheese, I learned an important lesson. High heat does not lead to a faster sandwich, it just leads to a ruined one. Instead, the best way to make a grilled cheese was with a lower heat over a longer period of time. And as you can see, a grilled cheese made with that technique comes out golden on the outside and gooey on the inside. Just exactly what a good grilled cheese is supposed to be. In fact, I think I'll help myself. And this technique works because, as we saw before, a grilled cheese can only handle so much heat at once. So when you turn the heat down, it doesn't all get stuck in a big traffic jam on the outside. Instead, using a lower heat means that the grilled cheese only receives as much heat as it can handle, warming it up all the way through instead of just turning the outside to carbon. And this is also why I liked the second type of adults better. Instead of overwhelming me with a monumental list of tasks all at once, they gave me a chance to do a better job with one task at a time. In the same way then that grilled cheese works better on a lower heat and child me did better with one chore at a time than four, our audiences are more likely to do what we're persuading them to do when we slow down and take things one step at a time. So, for example, every so often I read papers about how bad the food at university dining halls is and how it needs to change. And that's a reasonable argument to make. In some cases, it's probably very true that the food on campus leaves a lot to be desired. Persuading the university to change the menu is a worthy cause. However, the people who write these arguments tend to turn the heat up too high and practically guarantee that their arguments will fail by overwhelming their audiences with demands. Usually, these less effective arguments will look something like this. The food needs to change, all of it, at all locations, because it isn't healthy and it isn't good. In order to do this, the university should hire all new staff to run the dining halls. They should also replace all their animal proteins with plant-based alternatives and eliminate fried snacks and candy from on-campus vending machines. Also, they should cancel their contract with the major soft drink company and install more water bottle filling stations on campus. An argument like that, however justified and correct it may be, is probably not going to work. It's a high-heat argument that gives the audience too many difficult jobs to do at once. The most likely scenario is that the audience will just ignore the argument because it sounds like a bunch of unreasonable demands. But even if they do take the argument seriously, they'll probably have a hard time following through very effectively because it's just too much to do all at once. See, not only is this argument asking for huge changes in personnel and services, it's also demanding more expensive things while limiting existing sources of income, and that's just going to be difficult. Now, to be clear, these might all be things that our hypothetical university really should do, but doing them all at once will be practically impossible. So a good argument with good intentions will end up being good for nothing because it will just be too hard for the audience to follow through effectively. Now, a more successful argument might look something like this. The menu items at the dining halls aren't serving the student population very well. Most crucially, there aren't any good vegan or vegetarian lunch options at most locations on campus, and that's a problem because it means that vegan and vegetarian students have to leave campus for lunch, which can be difficult to do between classes. Therefore, the university should add a vegan and vegetarian menu item for lunch. That way, vegan and vegetarian students can more conveniently find something to eat in the middle of the day. You might notice the practical specificity of this argument right away. It's narrower in scope and more focused on a concrete action. But it's also more manageable and immediately more doable. Where the first argument is likely to seem impossible to the audience, this lower heat one will seem pretty reasonable. It's a small adjustment that the university can make that will probably last a long time. So, by turning the heat down and recognizing that people can only do so much at a time, this argument is more likely to be persuasive or to lead to actual action. By paying attention to the human limitations of their audience, the author of this second argument has made something that is more manageable, more doable, and ultimately much more sustainable. So see, it's just like making a grilled cheese. Now, before we finish, it's important to point out a couple of things to avoid misunderstandings. It would be easy to think that the grilled cheese principle is saying something like set your sights low, don't push for big changes, and instead just poke at the status quo without really upsetting anyone. And to be clear, that is not what I'm saying. The grilled cheese principle is not a principle of resignation, it's a principle of strategy. Remember, the goal is to end up with a grilled cheese sandwich in the end, and just to make sure that it doesn't get ruined in the process. So the first point to bear in mind is that there isn't a rule that says you can only make one argument and then you have to be done forever. It's okay to persuade your audience to do something meaningful, wait a while to make sure that they do it, and then make another argument to persuade them to do something else. I think the way school is set up gives us the idea that we can only write one paper, so we have to say everything that we think all at once. But that's just not the case. Rhetoric isn't a thing you do once and move on. It's an ongoing process of negotiation in search of the best courses of action. So don't think that you're giving up on your actual goal by starting out with an argument that's smaller at first. You aren't. You and your audience are just taking the first step in a longer rhetorical process. For example, once the university starts offering vegetarian lunches, feel free to push them to change what's in the vending machines. Just make sure that that first job is really done before you try to give them another one. And that leads us to the second point. The real goal of everything that we're doing should be lasting, sustainable change. And that happens best when we give our audience room to take manageable steps one at a time. If we give them too much to do all at once, we run the risk of burning them out and losing all of that progress that we're really hoping for. The key is to recognize the importance of sticking with it over time. Cooking a grilled cheese sandwich on a lower heat does take a longer time, but it also ensures that you end up with an edible sandwich. So don't think that the grilled cheese principle is about making weak arguments and then letting your audience off easy, because it's just not that at all. Really, the grilled cheese principle is about keeping a manageable amount of heat on your audience over time. It involves a recognition that your audience is made up of real people and a commitment to guide them through the process of creating lasting change one step at a time. Do that, and it's far more likely that your grandest aspirations will stick rather than fall apart prematurely. So there you have it. Treat your audience like grilled cheese and set yourself up for persuasive success. Because the real success isn't in making a flashy or dramatic argument, it's in bringing about meaningful and lasting changes for the better. And speaking of grilled cheese, I think I'll go finish the one that I made earlier. Before I go though, thanks for watching, and an especially huge thanks to those of you who have subscribed and who keep showing up. You're the reason I'm doing this, and sharing the fun of writing and rhetoric with you is even more delightful than a grilled cheese. But grilled cheese is still pretty delightful, so maybe go make one for yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.